a New Year's almost a message for you, and so we're going to start with Exodus 17. Exodus 17 verses 1 through 7. Short passage. I will read. All the congregation of the people of Israel moved on from the wilderness of sin by stages, according to the commandment of the Lord, and camped at Rephidim, but there was no water for the people to drink. Therefore the people quarreled with Moses and said, "Give us water to drink." And Moses said to them, "Why do you quarrel with me? Why do you test the Lord?" But the people thirsted there for water, and the people grumbled against Moses and said, "Why did you bring us out of Egypt to kill us and our children and our livestock with thirst?" So Moses cried out to the Lord, "What shall I do with these people? They are almost ready to stone me." And the Lord said to Moses, "Pass on before the people, taking with you some of the elders of Israel. Take in your hand the staff with which you struck the Nile, and go. Behold, I will stand before you there on the rock at Horeb, and you shall strike the rock, and water shall come out of it, and the people will drink." And Moses did so in the sight of the elders of Israel. And he called the name of the place Massah and Meribah, because of the quarreling of the people of Israel, and because they tested the Lord by saying, "Is the Lord among us or not?" Let's pray. Father, we just lead in this time. May we hear from you. May it be your message, not mine, not anything else. And we just hear you and your truth and apply it. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. So this past week, I went on a youth retreat. I admittedly, good thing this is not taped or anything, but admittedly, I had a terrible attitude. I did not want to be there. There was like a couple kids that are like, you know how children, teenagers are, they're like upset because their like parents are forced to. Well, I was right there next to them. I was like, I do not want to be here. You know, I was like, it's freezing. I didn't get much sleep. The food is subpar. And then I shared my bed with a 20-year-old, I think he was like 20-year-old guy. Like, I walk in and there's 4 people, 2 beds, and I'm like, oh, this math is not good. I think I rolled over. We have a king size bed, so we don't really kick each other. But then I rolled over and I put my leg on it. It's really embarrassing. I don't even know him. All right, but but I'm back, thankfully. The kids are back too, thankfully. And so thank you for your prayers. For those of you who were instructed to pray this week, I think we had a good time. But in all seriousness, I'm torn theologically about youth retreats and youth conferences, right? Because there's like good and bad. And so I keep going back and forth as I think about this more. Are we helping or are we hurting these kids? You know, because it's both. On one hand, retreats are good. It is a way for students to detach from the world, right, and to solely focus on God. Even if they don't want to, they're forced to. Okay, we take away their phones and we tell them when to pray. We take away their food, and if they don't listen, and then when they pass out, unlike here, like people are next to each other, like poking you, and they're engaged in this worship, right? They pray more than they normally do, and they worship more than they normally do. They read the Bible more than they normally do, and they're engaged in Christian thought more than they normally do. So, of course, they're going to experience God. You see what I'm saying? And so, if you're doing that earnestly, like, God will find you. But on the other hand, retreats are dangerous because that's not real life, right? Adults, that's not real life. Yeah. Without explanation, I think you student might come to think that like, oh, this is how it normally is. So like that retreat high or that spiritual experience that they have, they might look at me and other pastors like, oh, is this what you go through on a daily basis? No. I'm not high on Jesus all the time. Sometimes it's like really hard for me to pray and read the Bible and be obedient. That's just normal, right, adults? This is just normal course of it. When we cut off from the world, it's obviously easier to focus on God. You ever been on a short-term mission trip? Isn't it much easier to pray out there, right, than here? But what happens when we get back home? That's reality. Okay, I'm not saying you shouldn't go to retreats, but I think there's like got to be on the back end. There's some walking that we need to do. There's some continual accountability that we need to have with these children. What happens when you get back? Life is not a retreat. Like I said, retreats are easy. You have no choice. You have no choice. You're forced to. Your phones are taken away. You're told when to eat, when to sleep, when to pray, when to get up, when to worship, and all this stuff. You know why Christian life is hard? Because Christian life is a choice. That's why. You're not forced to. And when you get older, you don't have to sleep. There's no parents. You can stay up if you want. Exciting, right? But Christian life is a choice. Joshua 24:15. Joshua is near the end of his leadership of Israel, right? Joshua succeeded Moses, and then he urges Israel. He says, choose for this day whom you will serve. Whether the gods your fathers served in the region beyond the river, that's Egypt, or the gods of the Amorites in whose land you dwell, that's the Canaanite land that they inhabited. Choose. But as for me and my house, we will choose Yahweh. That's what he did. It's a firm decision. It's not like some type of spiritual experience, although it can be in a certain way. But a lot of it, it's a choice. It's a choice. Are you going to choose God over other things? As we close 2017 and enter into 2018, my aim for our EM ministry as we move forward in the next year is spiritual growth. It's growth. Right? I think last year, I think 2016 was a little bit tumultuous. 2017, I got here and we try to settle things and regroup almost, right? And then now we got to grow. People, we can't just stay right where we are. We have to grow, right? And that's obvious: growth in knowledge, growth in love, and compassion, in obedience, in service, and all this stuff. But we have to grow in choosing God. Okay? I want you to choose God. I want you to choose God over all the things of the world. I want you to choose him over and over and over again. At church, I've been here for 10 months, and I've come to know you, and of where your spirituality is at. I think for the most of you, you're not new Christians. Many of you have grown up in church, and most of you confess that Jesus Christ is your Lord and Savior. But conversion is not it. It's the starting point. It's the starting point, and we have to move forward. We must learn to choose him every moment of our life. It's hard. We must learn to choose him. So let me explain what that means through this passage. And to orient ourselves, I'm going to use 4 landmarks. It is the context, the background, the problem, the people's response, and God's response. Okay? And so the 7 short verses of this story, it's going to be 4 things: the background, the problem, the people's response, and God's response. Look at verse 1. The first half of verse 1. It says, all of the congregation of Israel, all the congregation of the people of Israel moved on from the wilderness of sin by stages according to the commandment of the Lord and camped at Rephidim. At this point in Israel's history, God has delivered them from Egypt. He's literally leading them, because by day there's a cloud of smoke, and by night is a cloud of fire. They're wandering through the desert, being led by God to the promised land, right? As we talked about last week, Israel is also twice Yahweh's. First, because he chose them. Remember, he called Abraham, right? And he chose them. Second is because he delivered them from Egypt. It's twice as. Same for us. We are twice God's. We know that God chose us. Ephesians 1 says that even before he set the foundations of the world, that he knew us, the elect, and we are redeemed through his gospel, the gospel of Jesus Christ, right? And so as believers, what we should do? We should believe in him, and we should follow his command. It's pretty much the same thing. Church, do you see the parallels of this, right? We were made by God, we were redeemed by God, and we follow his command. But life's not that simple, is it, right? Life is more difficult than that. What's the problem? Look at the problem. Look at the end of verse 1. There's no water. There's no water for the people to drink. Water is a huge problem. There's a huge problem in the desert, right? Water is a huge problem. Scientists say that without food, someone can survive up to 3 weeks. Without water, you die in 3 days. That's what it is. Without water, in the desert, death is imminent. Furthermore, don't get it twisted based on the brevity of this passage. This is not a trickle of water. This isn't like 2 Koei systems, okay? This is a huge river. Some scholars estimate that men, women, and children are about 2 million at this point of Israel. So 2 million people are trampling through the desert. Not only that, what are they? They're farmers. Farmers have what? They have cattle. Well, your cattle got to drink too. You see what I'm saying? So this isn't just a small amount of water. What they need is like a huge river in the desert that doesn't make any sense. However, the problem is natural, isn't it? Right? I'm moving quickly here because this is it's just a setup. The third point, how do the people respond? What do they do? Look in verse 2. Therefore, the people quarreled with Moses and said, give us water to drink. Look at verse 3. Why did you bring us out of Egypt to kill us, our children, our livestock with thirst? Church, many times we draw a line between good guys and bad guys in the Bible, right? And so Israel, disobedient, that's bad, right? Pharisees, they're evil, they hate Jesus, that's bad. Disciples, they're okay, but they're dumb, right? And then so we're like, oh, like, let's not do them, or we just put them like in the bad corner. However, you can't blame them. You can't blame them. We're in the middle of this desert because your cloud led us here. You see what I'm saying? In essence, what are they saying? Do you know what you're doing? Have we ever said that, right? When you're not the driver, when you're not the leader. Are you serious right now? That's the decision you made, right? God, are you really in control? Isn't that how we feel sometimes? You ever felt like that? I don't have to ask you to raise your hand. Of course, we all felt like that. If you're ever going to listen to any part of this sermon, please listen to this. This is as believers. Like I said, I call this intermediate Christianity because this is not beginning Christianity. I think most of you are not beginners. Most of you are in the intermediate range. Before I dropped out of accounting at the University of Maryland, I took beginning accounting and then intermediate accounting and advanced accounting. I think we're at that intermediate stage. So as believers, the troubles in our life won't stop. Just because you get saved doesn't mean everything's good. The girl doesn't go out with you all the time. The job doesn't happen all the time. Things just don't happen sometimes as believers. We all go through troubles in life. Many times we get so mad, don't we? My wife is driving me crazy. My kids are annoying. My work is so hard. My family, my parents are nuts. Right? This church sucks. My pastor is incapable. My elders, I don't know what they're doing. You ever felt that way? Yes, we have. We all have. We all experience like this as believers. That's the caveat. You have to do as believers. If you believe in God, and if God's alive, He saved you and redeemed you, and you experience these emotions, right? Then you know who your ultimate problem is with. It's not with your spouse. It's not with your family. It's not with your church. The ultimate problem you have as a believer is with God. Your biggest problem is with God. This is the spouse you gave me. I'm praying for my family all the time, and they don't change. You tell me to pray, and I pray, and they don't change. Are you even there? Do you even want to save them? This is the pastor you send us? This is the elder you put in charge? Are you sure you know what you're doing? Are you sure you know what you're doing? Are you even in control? God, do you even love us anymore? Students, this is real life, right? I'm not saying never to go to retreat. That's not it. I went to a retreat too, just like you, and I remember experiencing the warmth of God there as a 9th grader, and it was so real to me. I don't know if it was all in my head. It could have been. But I really appreciated that experience, and I wouldn't be here without that experience. It like builds on top, so there's good things that I'm not. And I'm glad I went with you, even though I was a party pooper, because I get to spend time with you. Sometimes in life, things aren't so clean cut. It's not that easy, right? Sometimes in life, things are going to stretch your faith. I met a pastor once who started, he's much older than me, like 20 years ago. First day on the job. Imagine like my first day on the job, his kid gets hit by a van and dies. First day on the job. I was like, are you serious? It's nuts. I don't know what I would do. I mean, I don't know what it feels like to have kids. We don't have kids. I don't know what it feels like to lose kids. To lose kids at your job, working for God. What are you doing, God? What's the answer to that? Do you even care about me? Are you listening to my prayers? Why did you bring us out here? I remember talking recently. I'm talking to another person. He goes to a PCA church. He's fed up with his elders. He's Korean, surprise. And then so he's having trouble tithing because he doesn't trust leadership. And then as a pastor, I'm like, you have to give. And it's hard because he's like telling me all that they're doing. And I was like, what am I giving money for? God, what are you? So as believers, our faith gets stretched. Problem's not with anything. God, what are you doing? When we start to doubt God, we start to doubt His goodness. When we start to doubt his goodness, guess what happens? We blame him. Look at verse 2, right? And Moses said to them, why do you quarrel with me? Why do you test the Lord? Now, let me explain this. Quarreling in English, right? That could be like bickering, right? It could be like arguing, whatever. In Hebrew, this means, this could mean a formal lawsuit. There's, in essence, suing God. All right? Israel is bringing a formal charge. They're not just disagreeing with God. They're saying, we're accusing you of covenant unfaithfulness. You said you were going to take care of us. You promised to take care of us, but there's no water. You lied to us. You're failing in your faithfulness. What are you going to do? Right? And then so when they try to stone Moses, it's a rejection. The stoning is not only like in the New Testament, but in the Old Testament, stoning is a rejection of leadership. Here we just fire people. Before, they stone you to kill you because we're rejecting you as a leader and you did a terrible job. This is your punishment. That's pretty much what they're doing. This is the main point. This is what I mean. Christian life is a choice. Right here. In that moment, that's a choice. We must learn to choose God right there. Even when everything about our physical eyes and everything that we see in our intellect says this is wrong or this is not going well, in that moment, we have to preach to ourselves and choose God. Israel should have remembered. Remember, he led you out of Egypt. Remember, parted the Red Sea. Remember the cloud and the fire. You see it. But then in their problems, they forget all that. They should have prayed. They should have called out to God. They should choose to act that way. I don't know why this is happening, but I believe in you, and I believe you are our salvation. Christian life is a choice. In Genesis 3, the same thing, right? The serpent tempted Eve. Guess what he tempted her with? He didn't tempt her with money, power, or comfort. He didn't tempt her with flowers, or a Louis Vuitton bag, or a Gucci bag, or a Chanel bag, or a Celine bag, or any other bag that you can buy at Tyson's Galleria. You know what he tempted her with? He's saying God is not good, and he doesn't care about you. That's what it is. That's what he tempted her with the idea that God is not good, he doesn't care about you. Adam and Eve should have chose God. I don't know why he told us not to eat from that fruit, but he loves me and takes care of me, so I'm not going to eat from that fruit. That's what it is. Church, there'll be confusing moments in my life like this. In our lives, you have gone through confusing moments in your life, in our church life. We don't have to get into that. In these moments, we must remember we are wicked, but God is good, and he loves you. And our full obedience, that is the way to a blessed life. That is the Christian life. We must fight Satan. We must fight our own inclinations. How many times have we thought, I don't want to go. I don't want to give. I don't want to forgive. I don't want to pray. I don't want to read. This is what I mean. 2018, spiritual growth. We must mature. In these moments, we have to choose. We have to choose. If you were God, what would you do here? How would you respond? Not that you yourself are deity, but you yourself in your personality, what would you do? Right? I remember going on a Mexico mission trip when I was a youth pastor, and one of my former students, oh my goodness, I almost punched him. Literally, I'm not exaggerating. I get so mad, and some of you know me and know me enough that I know I have a temper. I don't know what, I forgot what he did. I was so mad. And he was Korean, and his dad was like super Korean, so I remember thinking to myself, I think if I punched him, I think his dad would understand, and I would not get fired, right? And then so I was like thinking about that. You know why I got mad? Because parents, isn't it the troublesome kid you have the most attachment with, right? Because you always like you take care of it the most, right? So I have like 15, 20 kids, and he is a knucklehead. I'm thinking about all the McDonald's, all the rides, all phone calls, and all this stuff that I gave to you, and you still disobey me. You know, if I didn't give you all this stuff, maybe I wouldn't have gotten that mad, right? But I poured in all this stuff, and you'd still disobey me. Doesn't God have every right to think this way? I chose you. You started with one Abraham. You grew to over 2 million. That's because of me. And you were in slavery, but now you're going to prosperity. That's because of me. And now you accuse me, and you're suing me? The amazing thing about God is that the greater our rebellion, the greater his grace. the more, it's so counterintuitive, right? How many times if somebody hurts us, we get more angry. The more they hurt us, the more angry we get, and we want to stick it back to them. And to the degree that they stuck it to us, and maybe just a slightly more because we have to win, right? But God goes the opposite way. The more we reject him, the more we rebel as believers, the greater his grace to us. God works in opposite. You know why? Because he's saying, I love you. And how can I show you my love unless it's up against your unfaithfulness? What does God do? What does God do? Look at verse 4. Moses is fed up, cries out, God, what am I to do? What shall I do with these people? They're ready to stone me. Sometimes pastors pray this. Just kidding. You didn't get it. How does God respond? Does he respond in anger? Does he send fireboats and thunder, locusts, and all, whatever he could have done? No. Look at verse 5. Look at verse 5. I'm going to break this down. God tells Moses to pass on before the people. That's all the people, okay? So what he's doing, this passing before the people is an act of openness. No hiding. Right? Remember when magicians go like this? No hiding. That's what Moses is doing. Pass on before the whole people. Next, what is he? He said, gather the elders. Remember, Israel is an elder-led society. This is where I think Presbyterian polity comes from, right? This is why we think we're the most biblical, because we have our roots in the Old Testament, right? And then so they're the representative leaders. So the elders are the leaders. So if you do it for the elders, then you're essentially doing it for all of Israel. You see that? And lastly, what does he say? God tells Moses to take the staff with which he struck the Nile. The weirdness about that phrase is the fact that Moses only had one staff. You know? So why would God specify? He only had one staff, right? It's like if you bring your shoes. Then most of us have multiple pairs of shoes. Like, oh, which shoes, right? Is it going to rain? Is it going to be muddy? It'll be indoors. You know, he only had one staff. There's no choice for Moses. But he says the staff with which he struck the Nile. It's not a multitude of staffs that Moses is picking from. It's the multitude of actions. What he's telling Moses is to bring your only staff, but the function will be for judgment. When you struck the Nile, what happened? The water turned to blood. It was a judgment from God upon Egypt to let my people go. It was a judgment staff. God is telling Moses, bring your judgment staff. Do you see the vague picture that is coming into focus? There are witnesses. There is the accuser in the elders, and now there is judgment. Israel is suing God, and God is conducting a trial. If this trial were to really happen, who would be guilty? Who would be guilty? It's Israel. Do the math. This is chapter 17, okay? Chapter 14. He parts the Red Sea. But before Moses parts the Red Sea, they're like, this is what they say. Is this because there are no graves in Egypt that you have taken us away to die in the wilderness? That's chapter 14. 14. Next chapter, 15, right? They're upset because they came across bitter water and they couldn't drink it. You know what they said? They said, what shall we drink? Like they're demanding him. 14, 15, chapter 16, the previous chapter, it says, all the people grumbled against Moses and Aaron in the wilderness. Would that we have died by the hand of the Lord in the land of Egypt? Like, they're questioning him again. Every chapter they question him. Who is guilty of covenant unfaithfulness? It is Israel, it is not God. Every chapter they accuse God. Every chapter he has been faithful, you see. Israel's guilty. But that judgment doesn't go on Israel. Look at verse 6. Behold, I will stand before you there on the rock at Horeb, and you shall strike the rock, and water shall come out of it, and the people will drink. And Moses did so in the sight of the elders. Israel sues God. God commences a trial. God takes the punishment. This is a foreshadowing of Christ and what he does for us. Who is unfaithful? We are unfaithful. How do we get saved? It is only through the blood of Christ. How does water flow from a rock? How does guilty sinners become holy? How do dead people have abundant life? It is only through Christ and Christ alone. In 1 Corinthians 10 verse 4, Paul's talking about this. Paul literally talks about this, and he literally writes in 1 Corinthians 10:4, he says, Christ was that rock. That was Christ. The first time I studied this passage, I struggled with it. I was like, well, God, what are you doing? Why did you teach him a lesson this way? You know? Like, for me, like, ultimate punishment, or something severe and hard to teach him a lesson, right? Like, if you guys keep not crossing the street, I'll beat you up so bad that every time you look at a street, you get like PTSD and you'll never cross the street. Why don't you do it that way? Why did you yourself take the punishment? Aside from the theological implications of substitutionary atonement and all that stuff, why did God do it this way? Think about it. If God punishes too severely, we won't come to him. We'll be afraid, right? If he doesn't punish at all, what happens? We mush it. I'm like, oh, you're nothing. I don't believe in any of it. Anything what you say, you're not going to punish us anyway, right? He had to do both. Severe punishment, but then he doesn't punish us because then we'd be afraid of him. He punishes himself. How does that do to us? What does that do to us? It moves us into obedience, you see. Rather than doing it that way, he takes the punishment and he moves us to obedience. The ultimate sign of God's saving love is the cross. The cross that was meant for us, the death that was meant for us. And his substitution moves us to obedience. Church, like I said, in 2018, I want to move towards spiritual growth. I want to move towards spiritual growth. Okay? And that means, yes, growing in knowledge and service and all this stuff, but in those moments where we're like, you're not good, what are you doing? We must choose him. We must battle him in our minds. And we must convince ourselves. As an application point, especially those of you who are, I'm going to do something a little different, okay? I have index cards. You don't have to write full sentences. I want you to complain to him. God, what are you doing? And then write this down. I'm not going to look at it. I'm going to give you envelopes and you can seal it, and I'll give it back to you at 2019 or end of 2018 if I'm still here. Just kidding. Those of you who are new, I'll give you back the envelopes because I don't know when I'll see you next. But for all of us, I'm going to keep these, and I promise, I did this for 3 years in my youth group. I almost threw it away after 2 years, and I was so mad. But I found them, and then so I want to keep building on this. God, what are you doing? Why is my life this way? Why is my church this way? Just write down short things and then commit to prayer throughout the year, and we'll see how God changes us. We'll see how he is faithful. Do you see how Israel, they brought an actual lawsuit against him, and then he didn't strike them down? I'll mail it back to you guys. What he did was he covered us. And so fine, let's see if he does it for us. You know? Things that you're worried about. Things that you're like, why is this happening? Things that you're like, you're not real. Or, I know you're real, but it's hard when it's like this. Let's write that down and then spend some time in prayer. And then I'll lead us in a closing song. My wife's going to pass out envelopes. Write your name on the envelopes, then we don't know who to give it back to. But I want to do this yearly, and then see, and then you can see in multiple years how God is changing you and leading you in that way. And so let's do that.